Hey everybody, welcome to the Dad Challenge podcast. My name's Josh. Thanks for joining me today. We've got a very important video. A lot of people have been asking me to watch the show Quiet on Set. Just finished watching it with my wife. I was waiting for a little bit of time where we could sit down together because my wife and I like watching those things together. You know, contrary to popular belief, my wife is actually interested in what I talk about. She is on my side. She just doesn't watch every single video, but she absolutely is with me on this whole thing. And so we sat down this morning and we watched it together, and oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. First, let me say F. James Marsden. Okay, we'll get to that soon. But this documentary is very explosive, and it should change the industry forever, but it won't. But we're talking about it. So first things first, you know why I'm here. Most of my channel is dedicated to the exploitation of children online via the internet, via social media, family vloggers and influencers and stuff like that who do that. I've had this argument many times put to me by many people who think that I'm wrong or want to be like, well, what's the difference? And so one of the main arguments I get is, what is the difference between these kids on social media platforms and child actors? And I've always said things like child actors have protections put in place. Coogan laws that give them their money that they're owed, which is not very much, by the way, but they do get it legally. On set, you're only allowed to work a certain amount of hours. You get education. You're forced to have it. If you don't have it, then they can't do it. They have to abide by all these regulations and standards in order to hire children to do these jobs. Also, let's not forget that these kids are acting a role. They're not playing themselves. They're not giving you information when they shave their legs and have their periods and put bras on and first time going on a date and kissing guys. Like, these are people who are acting. You're not seeing their real lives, unlike social media kids who you are seeing their lives. And a lot of times the parents are saying things like raw and real, and this is we're showing you all the moments and the meltdowns and the crying and the abuse and everything that we get to see, right? So there's obviously a complete disconnect between the two, right? But the one thing that they all share that's in common is that they are exploited, okay, in huge ways. And this documentary was really eye-opening for me because in the end, and we'll get to it, we're Tarantinoing it right now, they're just discarded. They are dollar signs. They are flash in the pan moments. They make a lot of money, and so does Nickelodeon, and then they're just discarded. And if they have something to say about it, if they look back on it in the moment, and the saddest part of all this is they only get to come out with their stories when it's all over. Because during the time that they're in these industries, they're not allowed to say words. They're not allowed to be complainers or say things or whistleblow because they'll just lose their careers. And it's always a threat of that. Okay? Same thing with child stars on social media is their parents do the same thing. Right? We can't go on these lavish Disney vacations or travel, have these houses, these cars. If you don't do this, they're coerced. So when it comes to the circles and the Venn diagram of kids online and social and kids who are acting, you know, it's not a full circle, but there's a lot in that little middle part. Okay, there's a lot that they all suffer through. And if it's anything, when you watch this documentary to see how bad these children are treated, all that says to me is that kids who are on social media and exploited in this way have it way worse because they don't have any of the damn protections in place. There's no actors unions. There's no guilds. There's no managers that you can complain to. There's no HR departments. There's nothing like that. There's no investigations going on when something happens like what Dan Schneider did and what some of the guys did in the show, okay? So they've got it worse. So they're both bad, but the social media kids have it a lot worse, okay? Because they don't have a choice. Actors, kids too, in the acting world, it's like they do have a choice, but they don't. You know, it still can't get informed consent from them, so that still stands. So I wrestle back and forth with this all the time, but it still stands to me that kids who are abused on social media and who are exploited have it a lot worse. But this documentary changes the game, okay? And it is crazy. So if you don't know anything about Nickelodeon itself, and you should, because we all grew up in the 90s, they're just shows for like tweens, 8 to 13, 14-year-olds. I'm guilty of watching it when I was young. My daughter loves some of these shows, especially iCarly. She likes that. There's a new one that she's watching with these two little superheroes, or a superhero and his son, or a superhero and another kid. I don't really watch them. I glance. But anytime I've ever sat down with my daughter while she's watching something like iCarly, it always irked me a little bit that there's some type of like content or something they put in those shows that's not for kids. That's a little weird, you know, and it's always just flirting with the line. Where you're like, well, they are teenagers and they're grown up and you don't want to shield them and protect them from everything. They should be exposed to a little bit. It's just a joke, blah, blah, blah. Parents often will tell ourselves, we'll tell ourselves it's not a big deal. But when you see why it's done, then you realize the predatory nature behind it. It's not that my child is a victim from watching it, but the victim is the kid on the television that it's being done to. And that's really, really sad and that's really scary. And so I'm going to walk you through the 4 episodes right here. I'm going to give you I took notes as I was watching the show. Trigger warning. Big time. Okay? We're talking about SA. We're talking about exploitation. We're talking about abuse, Weinstein level stuff. And you're going to get really upset because there are moments in this that I was like, what in the F and F? I look over at my wife and she's also nicer about it, but what in the what? That's what she does. Okay? But I asked her too. At the end, I'm like, what was the thing that stood out for you the most? And we'll get to that. But what an insane documentary series. You need to go watch it. I can't display it here. I'll get copyright striked. But you need to go watch All Quiet on Set. I have it on Prime or through another thing I have to pay for. I paid the extra month just so I could watch the show. It needs to be watched by every single person. And let me tell you this. If you let your kids continue to watch these shows on Disney and Nickelodeon and stuff like that, you are giving your views and watches to these channels who are making money. I am now putting an absolute full stop ban on anything that is directed by or has their hand in anything with Dan Schneider. First of all, that's the first one I'm doing. And even Disney, when you get, I'm bad at Disney right now. And I'm just saying, like we don't want to give our social media currency to child exploiters on the internet and social media, the same goes here. If we continue to let our kids get into this content, even though it's not super crazy bad, and to some degree it's not. Again, you are aiding and abetting the victimization of child stars. So you got to really, really, once you watch this documentary, you got to know, like if you've ever seen Blackfish or any crazy other documentary, you're like, okay, no longer do I want to go to SeaWorld or Marine Land because you've seen that. It changes your mind. This will change your mind. And if it doesn't, there's something wrong with you. Okay? Do not let your children watch Nickelodeon shows anymore. Okay, it's going to piss you off. So episode 1. So everybody knows the problem with Nickelodeon is the super gross sexualization of their stars. Dan Schneider clearly has a foot fetish. Dan Schneider is clearly someone who grew up not liked by many people, right? And has this weird haircut. He's obviously developmentally arrested as a teenager. And it shows in the content that he puts on or allows to or writes into shows. And it's funny because if you want to screenshot anything that's streaming, you can't. They have these weird protections in place that if I put a screen record on my thing, it just goes blank. So I literally put my phone up to the TV to record some of these moments. And the only proof we need that Dan Schneider does these things is him saying it. So let's have a receipt, shall we?
Murky. At the end of the day, I love it when the cat gets sassy with me because I get to write all the scripts with some very talented writers, but I can put them in any horrible predicament I choose.
And not only horrible predicament, but like, look at this, again, trigger warning, but this is Ariana Grande being sexualized on Victoria's 2 for 2 minutes straight, so warning.
Have you ever said something, like a sentence, and thought to yourself, wow, like, I bet nobody else on earth has ever said those exact words that I just said. That happens to me a lot. So now, just for fun, I'm gonna say 3 sentences that I bet not one person has ever said before in the history of mankind. Sentence number 1. Oh man, my uvula got stuck between that hamster's toes. See? That could never happen because your uvula is that swingy thing in the back of your throat right here.
That's what I'm thinking.
So there's no way you could get it stuck between a hamster's toes. Sentence number 3. I'm soaking wet! Quick, somebody bring me the ocean! No one would ever say that. Why? Because if you are soaking wet and you're upset about it, the last thing you'd want is for somebody to bring you the ocean. Because the ocean is even more wet than even the wettest person in the world. Have you ever tried to get your whole big toe in your mouth? Check this out.
And it's not just the actions, it's the words that they're told to say. And these kids, I want to believe a lot of times when they start this out, they're innocent, and then obviously the innocence is taken away. And you'll see that in the documentary. There's a part where something is said and sprayed on someone's face to look like a, you know what I'm talking about. And it brought me to be like, because I'm always making parallels in the worlds, right? And the parallel that I'm making, a couple of parallels, is Ren and Jacqueline, the Garza crew, and Tiffany Smith from Piper Raquel. Okay? There's massive, massive implications to what's going on and what they're taking from this industry and putting it over here. Because you got Ren telling Jacqueline to say things like, I swallowed it, is that okay? And like in this innocent voice and everything else. And you got her eating phallic foods. Ariana Grande sticking a toe in her mouth, and she does the same thing. You got Garza Crew having her kids strangle each other and do inappropriate things, dress inappropriately. Like, they're all borrowing it from him because this is highly successful. And so when you see these people do that, they know it's wrong. They know who's watching it. It's predators. But they're taking a page from Predators books. Tiffany Smith, and we're going to get into this in a minute. I'll hopefully remember. But there's a story in here that happens, and a guy has a baggie, tons of baggies full of things from actors on sets. Okay? That's what Tiffany Smith is allegedly done. She was walking to the post office, one of her child actors, and she's like, what are you doing? And she admitted that she is sending, and allegedly admitted, that she sends soiled underwear and bras of Piper or Raquel to old men who like to sniff them. Okay? This industry, no matter what side you're on, is always going to be dangerous for children. And the parents who put their kids in this stuff should all be arrested. Okay? Let me get my mic a little closer so you can hear me in the back. If you exploit your children, or if you hurt children or target children in any way, you should be arrested. At very minimum, have those taken from you because you are clearly not fit to be a parent. Am I making myself clear?
Sometimes I wonder if you can get juice from a potato.
When we were watching this, my wife and I, this is like uncomfortable. You're just uncomfortable. And so when kids watch this, they see, obviously it's innocent to kids. They don't see what parents see. But Dan Schneider is putting these jokes in these for his own gratification. Do you understand that? What he can get away with, the power he can use. And he's doing this because what is he doing with this content? He's forcing these child stars who he handpicked to put in these shows and has relationships with to act these things out on camera as an excuse, in my opinion, as an excuse for his own deviancy. Why does she do that with her mouth?
Is it possible for a teenage girl to drink water upside down? I'm thirsty!
Again, I go back to Ren and Jacqueline, which she's making her daughter say and do on camera. Make the correlation, everybody, because it's really, really important. All sides of this matter.
It's not possible! This has been me in a video.
And the amount of adults that are on set, and again, we'll talk about it, that let this happen, the amount of people and eyes and that this went through and got approved is insane. And it just means even those ones who have good intentions in the industry can't speak up and won't and will stay in the industry. And so this went through so many adults who were on set, watched all this, and it just still got out to the public. They are not being protected.
Come on! Give up the juice! Can you imagine?
Who even writes something like that for a child? Who in their... And let me tell you this. The person who can write something like that is somebody who is a deviant. There's no comedy about that. They are doing that for them. They're doing that for themselves. Dan Schneider did that for Dan Schneider. Isn't that crazy?
What life would be like with hippopotamus teeth?
Anyway, there's a whole other thing of Dan Schneider being creepy on set. You can go on. There's tons. People have been calling Dan Schneider out for years. Okay? For years. And no one spoke up. Well, they sort of did, but they didn't. Nickelodeon did nothing about it. Okay? And this documentary shows all that. Okay. So Dan Schneider grew up and he was an actor as a child, and he took that. I guess he was in a show for a little while, and then he like helped write some of it, and then it kind of launched his career. And then he kind of found the golden ticket, or the everything he touched kind of turned to gold. He found a good formula that kids like to watch certain things on TV, right? And he was very, very highly successful at that, and launched a bunch of different shows. And he launched like an SNL for kids, and he was very successful in that. And even those kids who are in the first iteration of that have all whistleblown in this documentary. Now, I can't get into everything they've said. It's too long. You guys have to go watch this documentary. Come hell or high water, find a way to watch this, okay? It is one of the most important documentaries in our conversation I've ever seen. You have got to find a way to watch it, okay? I found this in the documentary as well, that Dan is, and I said this earlier, that Dan is developmentally arrested as a teenager. And although in the end, there was no allegations of impropriety against kids, the power he used to create the content like this is all I need to know. And that's inappropriate. Not illegal. Again, a lot of people do a lot of crazy, gross things that aren't illegal, and they're still wrong, right? There was one joke in the thing that this kid spoke out against. He was always the superhero, and he didn't like wearing unitards and stuff like that because it exposed him. He was going through puberty, and he was like uncomfortable, but they didn't care. And one of them was he was the super nose or something like that, and they had literally what looked like dicks on his shoulder. And at one point, like, he sneezed, and there was like, I don't know how else to say this stuff without being really uncomfortable, but like, it sprayed on her face, and it was clearly, obviously something that they knew would get that reaction from adults and parents and on set, and they just did it anyway. It was just, there was never an excuse for it. And they just did it because I also found in this documentary that Dan would always find ways to push the boundaries, use his power, and do these things for whatever. I mean, I think he got off on the power he had to do it and the act itself to force them to make the content that he wanted legally. That's the only way to put this. He had the power to do it. He had the deviant mind to want it, and he just utilized it's a power dynamic for the deviants. Does that make? I think most predators and pedos and stuff like that, if interviewed and disseminated and all that stuff, will tell you it's a lot about a power dynamic too, and that's all this is. Dan Schneider, although maybe he didn't act out on his deviance with children, is that person. And maybe this was his outlet, allegedly, because I don't want to get sued. Another thing I noticed, that nobody could push back against Dan on these sets, right? There was that same kid that we talked about where he did the nose thing, his mom would always be like, this is no good. We can't have this. What's going on? She would kind of like push back a little bit, and then he just wasn't invited back. And that destroyed his relationship with his mom because he blamed his mother for trying to protect him, but they just fired because they didn't want problems, right? Tiffany Smith, very good example of this too. She's being sued by 11 of those people, by the way. She didn't want problems. And she would always force the parents to not be around and everything else. Like, this is crazy. So these kids who have parents that just try to protect them, Hollywood doesn't want parents around that are trying to protect kids. It's odd that the ones who stay in these industries, right, are the ones who get hurt the most because they don't have parents that are out there protecting them, and there's a big, big, giant bombshell drop that comes halfway through this documentary, okay? It's odd and it's crazy that the kids who are exposed the most to this, who are hurt the most in this industry, are the ones whose parents were likely the ones who were the least protective of their children. That's what I noticed, and that was really stark. There was an actor called Katrina, and she was told she was getting too fat, and she needed to be less fat, and apparently that stuck with her through the entire, even to this day as an adult, it stuck with her. Like, Jeanette McCurdy was, if you read her book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, there was a lot of that stuff in there. She called Dan Schneider the creator, and we all know who it is, but she didn't outwardly name him. I don't know why, but there was a lot of that stuff in there about like mentioning, but like Dan looks like a thumb, so with a shitty haircut, so how dare him, right? Like, but this guy just flexed power. He was a weirdo. Is Dan Schneider married? He is married. Dan Schneider and his wife, holy shit, how did she, like, are they divorced? Dan Schneider and his wife, Lisa Lillian, have been married for over 2 decades. The former Nickelodeon showrunner met Lillian while working in the network in the 1990s. They got married a few years later. Lillian is famous for her own right. She's the founder of Hungry Girl. She's married? And she didn't see the red flags of his stuff at all? Holy smokes! Okay. Then it talked a little bit about Amanda Bynes and kept bringing back Amanda Bynes. I thought that was kind of interesting because you see the Amanda Bynes train as it started. And I was a huge fan. We grew up watching her movies. She's a great actor. Her comedic talent. I always thought about her comedic talent being like, or her comedic timing being so incredible. Like, Amanda Bynes was someone who like was superstar with a bullet. Like, she was going right to the top. But she was not in this documentary. I wish she was. She knows secrets she's probably never going to tell, and probably shouldn't because of her mental health and things like that. And that's the danger of all this stuff, right? It's being someone like, why wouldn't you share this so that it won't happen to someone else? And at the same time being like, I understand why you don't want to share this because that could be re-traumatizing. Like, that's why predators enjoy so much of this stuff. Because on one hand, they don't get called out because the kid wants to stay anonymous, like Drake was, and you'll see that coming soon. And the other hand, you know, they're protected by very powerful people. Dan Schneider is very much like Harvey Weinstein. There was a lot of correlations and parallels made with the way he did things and the way Harvey Weinstein did things. It always starts out with massages, too. Like, what kind of wife is married to a guy that's getting random massages from people on set? Like, if you're a millionaire like Dan Schneider is, hire a masseuse, okay? An on-set one then, whatever. But he's always using his power. It wasn't even about getting a massage. It was about flexing his power. The one thing that was overarching in this entire documentary series was how much he flexed his power and in which ways he did it and in inappropriate jokes. At one point, I think it's coming up soon, there was 2 female writers on the Amanda Show. And Dan was abusive to them, and they obviously came out later and realized this. He forced them to split their salary, which was against the rules for union. But it's not like Nickelodeon wasn't making any money. And don't forget, Nickelodeon is absolutely to blame for a lot of this stuff too. Okay, you can't just let stuff go unchecked and not check in on things and keep track of things. Like, why is this full-timer getting paid nothing? And why is this happening? Nickelodeon is absolutely to blame for a lot of this too. They enabled Dan Schneider to do all this stuff. And I don't care if he's a hit maker. You don't make hits that hurt kids. And Nickelodeon should be shut down for the rest of eternity. My children are never going to watch another Nickelodeon show as long as I'm in charge of what they can watch. Okay? I'm telling my daughter, and I'm going to have an honest conversation with her. Weston doesn't watch this crap anyway, but he might when he gets older. Right? But I'm going to have an honest conversation with her and say, this is the reason I don't want you watching this. But I'm going to tell her about the documentary. I'm going to tell her about the stories of these actors and their lives that they have led and the hurt that that Nickelodeon has caused them and Dan Schneider. And I'm going to say, the reason I don't want you watching this thing is because I don't want to enable this. I don't want you giving your eyeball currency or whatever, your currency to this show, because it's just going to perpetuate these things. And I think it's our responsibility as consumers to be very responsible with what we watch. And if we don't give them our money, our watch, right, then they won't be able to continue to do these types of things. I want to have that honest conversation with her, and I want to maybe not force her not to watch it, but be like, I want you to be really careful what you're watching, and I'd love it if you didn't. But if you want to, I understand. But here's the I'm going to educate her. I'm going to educate my daughter on the realities of Nickelodeon, okay, and let her make the choice. But I know my daughter's really smart, and she'll be like, "You're right, Dad." I know she will, because she's awesome, and she's very, very empathetic. They had a character called Penelope Taint, which was gross, and these writers were like, that's adult, right? We know what a taint is, right? They were also like, they were really uncomfortable with how many sexualized jokes there were inside these scripts with the kids, and they're just like, again, it's twofold. They didn't push back because they're finally working in an industry they worked so hard to get into, and to push back, they knew they were going to get fired, right? And so they just dealt with it. But they also were like, this is too many red flags. And eventually, again, they one of them got fired and one of them left. And so, and sued and everything else. And so, this in any industry, it's so easy to say, well, why don't you do this? Right? When you're not in the position, when you got to pay your bills, pay the water, pay the hydro, get groceries. That's why it's so hard. But eventually they did the right thing. And I think in the end, that's what matters. They did this. They said things like, you don't mess with Dan. He was an effing asshole. That's what they said. You just didn't mess with him. You never did. And if you didn't work harder than him or didn't stay late and all this stuff, he'd just be like, you get rid of him. He was literally, he broke so many laws, so many labor laws. People were scared of him because of the immense power that he had. Even over the Nickelodeon CEOs, they just kind of let him run unchecked, as we see. Okay, watch the documentary, you'll see it. They didn't want any problems with it. And then when anything would come up, they would say something stupid like, in response to producers' questions, Nickelodeon has stated, it investigates all formal complaints as part of our commitment to fostering a safe and professional workplace. Did you? Because, no, you didn't. And they were given plenty of time to do that. And they were told by many people, and they still didn't. And they might have had the appearance of it, but no one got in trouble. Dan Schneider still worked on for years and years and years after all these allegations. We have adopted numerous safeguards over the years to help ensure we're living up to our own. It's giving when the social media guys sat in front of Congress and they're like, whoa, we're doing everything we can except taking down it, right? They always can say this because that's a lawyer's response and we all know it's a damn lie. But there's just not, I guess the world just like, okay, cool. But it's up to us to be like, okay, that's bullshit. We don't want to listen to it and continue to call them out. Because it's not good enough. You didn't do anything. Amanda Bynes and Dan, their relationship was very inappropriate. They were very, 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 very close. He handpicked her. He discovered her. He made her a rising star. And they were just inappropriately close a lot because that's a power dynamic. Again, don't forget Dan Schneider is the ultimate power, the god on set. And there was even a part of the show where the kids were talking to him in the skit where they called him a god. He wrote himself into the scripts as a god. That's real life to him. He was the god of Nickelodeon shows. And the power dynamic between a young kid who's growing and emerging, like Amanda Bynes, and this crazy adult director, producer who everybody is scared of, who has immense power, that's a dynamic that should never exist. There should be never a relationship between those two people. I'm sorry, never. And there was really, really bad. Amanda Bynes, to this day, if you were to ask her honestly and she could answer honestly, she would probably say, I would never, ever, ever put myself in that position ever again. She probably wouldn't have done it. She went off the rails. Her life was turned upside down. I hope she's doing better. She was so talented and so incredible, and probably is to this day, and just didn't deserve everything that happened to her. The Amanda Bynes story is the only thing we need. Well, Amanda Bynes, Jeanette McCurdy, all these people, Drake, all these people that came out of this. There's so many stories, but you just need one to be like, this should never happen. And it happened multiple times. The writers told about this joke, which pissed me off. Dan would show porn on his computer screen, and he would ask for massages, and he would trade it for spots in the show. Like if you wrote something, a skit, I'd put it in the show. He presented it as a joke, though, which my wife says, like, narcissists tend to do these types of things. They present it as a joke. Like, imagine if we did this. That's predator behavior, by the way. It's grooming behavior. They present it as a joke so they can have an out in case it doesn't land or they don't accept it as well. Oh, just kidding, just pranks, right? That's what they do. That's what predators do. They had a sodomy joke. So the sodomy line was like, they were trying to tell this high school story, and one of the writers was there, and she was told to lean over the table as if you're being sodomized and tell me that story again. And she did it. And she didn't even want to talk about it. She's like, look, I would never do that today, but she's like, look, I'm in a position, this is Weinstein level garbage. And he did it in front of people and he laughed. It's not like he was doing it privately and saying, come to my room, give me a massage. He did this all out in the open to be like, I am a god. You can do whatever I want. I am untouchable. And he was for the longest period of time, like Harvey Weinstein was, like Tiffany Smith was, like Jacqueline was, and still is, right? It all comes to an end eventually. And here's the scariest part, and this is why we talk about this. It all comes to an end eventually. And we all look back and be like, how did we let this happen? That's what I'm trying to tell you guys right now. How are we letting this happen with kids on social media? How are we letting this happen? We're all going to look back on this one day after we hear all the stories and the murders and kidnaps and all this 10 years down the road. We're all going to be like, how do we do it? When me and 10,000 other creators are here talking about it. And no one, and it'll be like, well, we tried. No, you didn't. No, you didn't try. And one thought came to me. And these women who are in this thing and who are pushed hard. And if you're wondering why the world has changed with DEI, which I don't agree with, by the way, I do not agree with in any capacity about diversity, equity, inclusion. I've been to many debates about it. I've seen both sides of the coin on it. But if you're wondering why more women should be in power, especially in Hollywood, Dan Schneider is the reason why that should be a thing. Okay, Disney's trying to empower more women producers, more women directors, and all that kind of stuff, because women are very, very much less likely to be this type of person. Like, let's be real. If you took 100 predators, 99% of them will be male. Okay? Let's just be real. And so I had that thought. I'm like, you wonder why they're putting women in these things? They want more women to be directing these things and all that kind of stuff. Say what you want about it. But less problems in the end, because women aren't susceptible to be doing this to children. They're really not. They're just not. Okay? And that's one thought I had. And like, so that's to me like, okay, if that's going to fix the issue, go for it. Do it. I don't care if it suffers to whatever people think it'll suffer to. Okay? If it protects kids, so be it. Dan would always threaten people with their job, always. So he was always holding it over people. And he never got, like, I mean, there's probably lawsuits we didn't even heard about. There's probably NDAs that were signed by people that were fired or let go or whatever that will never, like, this documentary is so insanely so bad for them. And there's probably so much. This is probably just skimming the damn surface. Iceberg right ahead. There's like a giant iceberg underneath. We haven't even seen it yet. And this one is so bad. That's what's crazy about this. So once there was a little bit of an investigation, Dan was probably talked to by higher ups because, look, we're getting too many complaints, figure this out, fix it. Then everything changed. Dan started yelling. He was a tornado on set. Everything kind of shifted as his power grew. And then Jenny, one of the writers, came in and said, look, he said, pitch a show. And he had me stand in front of all these guys and pitch the show. And then he listened. And then at the end, he just said, didn't you do phone sex at one point? That's all he had to say with her pitch. And then she quit. And then she sued them, which she should have. And I hope she got a huge payday for it. But Nickelodeon settled. There's obviously can't talk about it. Once you settled, you have to sign NDAs and all that kind of stuff. But it did ruin her career, and she was heartbroken about it. And so episode 1 kind of just outlines who Dan Schneider is and how he came from nothing to the power he was in, and then he just ended up being like every other jackwagon in power in the late 90s, early 2000s, even early 90s. Like he just was that type of person. Let's be real. We all people grew up in the 90s like me, had bosses like him. Okay, that was accepted behavior back then. Then the Me Too movement changed everything. Took Harvey Weinstein down, rightly so, and changed the game. Because all those injustices that were dealt to people back in the day, because the power dynamic was like, oh, it's just the way it is, that's no longer accepted. Okay? But we'll talk about it. So that's episode 1 in a nutshell. Basically, the writers whistleblowing, people coming on and talking about their experience, the younger actors coming and talking about their experience on the SNL style skit and just how bad it was. And then obviously they don't talk a lot about the inappropriate stuff as much, which is a big deal to me, but they land on it and they talk about it, and all the adults were all uncomfortable with it. My one takeaway though, and my one thing to these people who were victims of Dan Schneider too, but were also adults in the room, was you did have a responsibility. You absolutely did. And coming out now, great. But if you took your adult responsibility earlier on, a lot less kids would have been victimized. So that's just one thing I'm going to say about that. Episode 2, we find the parents aren't allowed on set. Like to start, there's a guy that comes and grabs them, is like, come on over here, and they would direct the kids, and the kids would be isolated. Sometimes the parent could have an eye on them, which you'll see later, but oftentimes they didn't. And some parents would just be like, they got to trusting, and guess what this parallels with? Tiffany Smith and the Piper Squad. Okay, the parents all say the same thing. We were eventually like, oh yeah, you can stay on set, no problem. When it all starts out and everything is all peachy keen, and all of a sudden later it's like, no, I don't want you here. Go to the back. They had a guest house they can stay in. Like they weren't allowed on set anymore. All of a sudden it just happened to become, once the power became there and they realized they couldn't come back without ruining their child's career and start doing those things, they would have to listen. So Tiffany Smith and Dan Schneider are two peas in a pod. They did it's almost like Tiffany had Dan on speed dial. Like, how do I screw people over? And like took a page out of every one of Dan Schneider's books. Tiffany Smith needs to be put in jail. Okay, it is crazy, the parallel. There was a guy named Jason who was a set guy who just was like an assistant, and he was the guy that always like had kids, and all the kids loved him. He'd take them to the set and take them here and all that. He was the guy who was just an assistant, right? I don't know, you call it like a set assistant, and he was that guy. And so Jason was exchanging numbers and emails with these kids because he was their friend. He was an adult. Okay, and one of these kids was an extra. And so here's what really struck me. Is that the predators on the set, because you're going to hear all about the predators. There was 2 of them, right? The predators on these sets would often target the secondary characters or like background characters because they were easy to get a hold of instead of the stars. And so what this guy did was he would message this girl back and forth an email, and the mom would kind of look at it and check, make sure it's all good. And they're just like, oh, talking about Hollywood and all the industry and stuff we could do for you. Like they would always, here's the thing I found about predators in Hollywood, and this is probably one of the most pervasive things about predators in Hollywood, because there's millions of them. Okay. A lot of them just get into this industry because they are predators, and that's easy access to children. And what they do is they leverage their power to be like, I can get you jobs and I can get you this and this and that, these opportunities, but you just have to do what I want you to do. Okay. There are kids out there who grew up in this industry who've just been completely wrecked, and they stayed in the industry because they had nowhere else to go. Right. But we are never going to hear all about it. Hollywood is the most dangerous place for children. Hey, do not put your kids. One thing I took away from this documentary was don't put your kids in Hollywood. If you like knowing what you now know and see here, and if you still put your kids in Hollywood, there's something wrong with you. Yeah, unless you are absolutely ready to be like they're there 100% of the time. But even knowing that when you do that, they're going to want you gone, that you stick to your guns, and it might even ruin their career. Because that's one thing I noticed, that the parents would start out being very concerned and voicing things and being like, that and nitpicking. And then they would just fire them. They'd be like, here, guy, bye. And so parents learn to shut their mouths instead of speaking up when they should have. So this is why you should never, ever just put your kids to work anyway. Like, I know that it's different between kids who are on social media and actors because there are protections for actors, but it still doesn't make this side okay. I've never said it was okay. I said it's different. But now, knowing what I know now, there should be no, like, honestly, if we were really, really, really serious about the protection of children, we wouldn't even have child actors. I know it's a hard square to circle, okay, because we all watch content with children in it. We love films, and often they have kids in them. Our kids love to watch stuff, so it's a really hard square to circle. I see that. So anyway, eventually the girl, she tells a story about how she turned the computer off when her mom came in the room and slammed her door. The mom went in the computer and saw that he sent a photo of him jerking it naked. And he said he sent it to her because he was thinking of her. Now, this is an adult sending it to an 11-year-old girl. Now, I tell you this as a dad. Don't. Like, I swear, like, the parents who I understand calling the cops and you want your justice, but if that ever happened to me, I'm sorry. I'd go to jail. I'm going to jail. I'm throwing you through a window. I'm going to jail. I don't care. You're not going to ever do that to someone else again. I'll put your head through a wall. I will find a way. Okay, I'll go to jail. That's it. That's just my passion about that type of stuff because of the justice that I never received as a child and my own story. And I think a lot of depends what your story is, and if you've gone through SA and everything else, it might vary. Okay, but if that happened to my daughter, I'm finding a way. Don't care. Anyway, she didn't, but here's the thing. This is what pissed my wife off the most. I asked her, what's the thing that pissed you off the most? She said this. The mom didn't call the police. She just kept her daughter away from the thing and canceled out of Hollywood and didn't go back. Did not call this guy out when she could have stopped it, because what happens next is crazy. So they take a step away from that for a second in episode 2, and then they start talking about Amanda Bynes a little bit more, how she takes off. There's a new show, and it's co-founded or co-directed or I don't know, like created by another guy, and Dan and him kept fighting about it. Dan is then removed from the set because he's so toxic. He denies it. He's like, no, I wasn't, but he was. And then it's still the producer credit on the show and everything else, but he became so toxic that people just said, look, I'm going to quit. Or I don't know what happened. They might have wrote a letter. I don't know. They didn't go into detail about why he was removed, but maybe the other producer guy was like, look, no more of this. Okay. And he was removed from the set multiple times, by the way. The first time this happened, Nickelodeon should have been like, we're done. If you have to remove the director or producer from your show for these reasons, you don't give him more shows, which is what Nickelodeon did, which is why they are completely complicit in all this. So they can say all they want. Oh, we put all these things in place. Did you? Because he did it again. So Amanda starts dating an older guy, and she's becoming a big star, and her parents are like, I don't want this. And, and then she's starting to fight against her parents. And then Dan steps in and literally helps her try to become emancipated from her parents. Doesn't really work, I don't think. But he steps in as this adult in her life, as her work dad or whatever you want to call it, right? And wants to literally separate her from her parents. Who does that? Who does that, everybody? With me together. Plutos do that. Groomers do that. Predators do that. They want to separate you from you. They want to cause divisions in those in your life who want to protect you. That's what they do. Okay? There's no argument about it. That's what they do. Lots of teen stars have been emancipated in the past. They talk about that, and it really pissed me off because mostly they get emancipated so that they can bypass the rules on set stuff with children, right? It's actually crazy. So many kids have been emancipated from their parents because execs and managers will step in and say, look, your parents are taking too much money, blah, blah, blah. You can have more and this and that. They get talked to. The industry doesn't want you with your parents, especially parents who are protective. And so the industry will do anything in their power to literally emancipate you legally, and they'll pay for lawyers. That's crazy. Okay, that happened in the Tiffany Rockette. There's so many parallels, okay? One of the kids was tried to get emancipated, and Tiffany tried to get that done. So Tiffany's literally Dan Schneider. That's what I'm trying to tell you guys here. So she did that, and that happens in this industry because they want the kid to have more availability on set, more of this and that, more power, and they will literally try to sever you from your parents. Again, try it. Parents who don't stick up for the kids, that's crazy to me. So Dan is removed from children's programming, and Nickelodeon brings him back at a huge cost to everyone. They take him away, and then they say things like, "We're investigating." It already happened. You had probable cause to take him away. You had cause to do it. You did it. You made the action, and then bringing him back, like YouTube taking away the comments from children's content, then bringing it back, just means they're just waiting for it to blow over. They bring him back because they need to make money. Money matters more to everybody, including social media platforms. I'm drawing the parallels. It's very important to draw the parallels. So Nickelodeon is acting here like YouTube, where YouTube's like, okay, we see that it's unsafe to leave comments on children's content, so we're taking it away. We did good. And they did. That was a great thing to do. Nickelodeon takes him off a set because he's toxic and everybody hates him. But then they bring it back. Why bring back? You know this person and this platform and these people doing these things are wrong. Why bring it back? No one has to, and that's the thing, they don't have to answer. So again, that's when Dan writes himself into the show as a god. They were accused of ignoring tons of child labor laws because if you don't, everybody says they have protections, they do, and for the most part they probably do adhere to the laws, but there's a lot of sets and productions that they probably don't adhere to child labor laws. And these kids admitted it on the show. Another thing was alluded to, Dan was always getting a kick out of walking the line with what he could get away with. Now, it's a power thing, right? It's a power thing. The sexual stuff is just added to the power thing and the deviance, but he also walked the line with other jokes to see what he could get away with because he just wanted to, because he wanted to flex his power. It's just, he's a predator. That's all there is to say about that. Dan was accused of being racist. Black kids really never got close to him as much as the white kids did, not even close. Black women were always getting hit or sprayed in the face or hit. Like there was one on the show that one woman was always getting, the one with the sneezed on thing with the thing. That was a black woman. One got her head smashed by Amanda Bynes with a violin. Black woman. The black kids are always the drug dealers or the dealers of something in the show. And then the one said like why he's getting his massages and stuff. People were always like, why are there always adult jokes? And he never said, he just laughed it off. There was a fetus skit that was super racist. And the mom, this is the one where the kid was removed for the third season because the mom was causing problems because of this type of skit. So he was Lil Fetus, which is a rap artist, and Dan said something about the color of the suit should be charcoal or something. It was really racist, super racist. And the mom spoke up about it and went to the agent, and the agent said, Mom, shut the F up, okay? If parents complained, it would ruin the kid's career, and that's what happened, ruined his career. Even the agent was like, don't speak up. If you want your kid to be in this industry, shut your mouth. How many parents of child actors are told by higher ups and their managers to shut the F up if you want your kid to survive in this industry? I bet you all of them are. Right? And those parents who shut the F up, they failed their children. There's no other way to put it, I don't care. And it ruined his relationship with his mom because he blamed his mom for getting kicked off the show. And that's really, really sad. So that's super destructive. Tiffany Smith also did this. She kicked so many kids off the show who were causing problems and parents who were causing problems. So many. Okay? These kids were friends. They build relationships and they're not welcome back and they can't say bye, nothing. Never welcome back. The same kid was always the brunt of the worst challenges. He was smothered. There was this tube challenge and it's like, what was that show where they had to do gross things with Joe Rogan? I forget what it's called. No Fear or something. I forget what it's called. But basically it was a kid's version of that. And this kid was smothered in peanut butter and the dogs licked peanut butter off him. And even in the video itself, he was like, I'm uncomfortable. You could tell he was uncomfortable. Writers were playing out their fantasies through their writing and the things they were doing with this kid. So the writers, like, you had to, like, they don't go into detail about the other writers. And all these, like, there's a team of writers, by the way, writing this. And Dan is probably inputting some of this stuff, but there's a team of writers living out their fantasies through this stuff. So it was almost like Dan was a magnet for predators, right? Because some people are just magnet for bad people in their lives, right? Bad relationships, always getting into relationships with bad men or bad women. Like there's people who attract that type of person. It seemed like Dan attracted that type of person. And if anybody ever spoke back against it, they would be gone. They said in the documentary that he dehumanized a lot of people. Obviously, look at the videos. He never came through with his promises. One, he said, if you eat 2 pints of ice cream, I'll give you $300. She never got the $300. And then later he's like, if someone kills that fly, I give him $30. And she's like, just add it to my tab. And then he basically pulled her aside in his office and screamed at her for saying that. I always follow through my promises. She's like, I was just joking. And she was gone. Dan fired his long-term producer friend through a stage manager. This guy's name is Virgil, and he was fighting for these kids. The kids loved him. He was the good guy. And he just fired him through the producer. And the guy, well, tell Dan to come fire myself. And the guy's just like, leave. Like, Dan is a coward. Dan Schneider is a coward asshole. Okay, he's just a straight coward. Then it gets into the Jason Michael Handy is arrested, and then everything, and shit hits the fan. Okay, Jason Michael Handy, the guy that sent that girl the picture, the mom didn't say anything. He was allowed to continue, and that's what pisses me off. If she would have just called the police at that moment, hope maybe, and we can't know this, he wouldn't have been able to do it to other people, because this is what happened. His job was to walk kids around, and the parents he came across as the nice guy. Something happened, and the cops got called, and they found literally thousands of CSAM images on his computer. He was a full-fledged pedo, and he had journals saying such about himself. He had Ziploc bags of tokens of the kids in it. Ziploc bags, likely sniffing them. With letters from the kids, emails. One bag had underwear. A lot of parents didn't want to be involved. So all the kids that were in those little baggies, apparently most of them didn't want anything to do with it. Trying to save their kids' careers. They know this predator's there, and they're like, my kid's career matters more. What does that sound like to you? It sounds like family vloggers who put their kids on the internet with millions of predators who have parasocial relationships with them not caring. That sounds exactly the same. So parents who don't care, who don't want to speak up when their child is a victim of a pedo, you are bad. Not as bad as the pedo, but you are bad. You are gross. If you do not protect your children, you are disgusting. Now, I know there's nuance to, like, I don't want my kid reliving these things, and I understand that as a person who grew up, who was S8. Okay, I understand that. But you have a responsibility, and there are avenues that you can pursue that make it so your kid doesn't necessarily have to be a forefront of all that stuff, which we'll see with Drake soon. Okay, but if you didn't stand up at the moment when you found this guy was that way, something wrong with you. They found journals. He wrote about his desires and how he struggles on a day-to-day basis, how he has to find a victim to R. Literally wrote it. And he's around children. Now, is that Nickelodeon's fault? Not necessarily, but if they had any inkling of it, and if a parent would have spoken up like this one should have, he should have been gone. Now, how many NDAs were signed during this process? Okay, we hear what you're saying. We figure, here's some money. Here's an NDA. We'll never know. After understanding what Nickelodeon has done and how much crap they've done, I want to believe that they probably just knew and didn't want to say anything because it was just going to get worse. That's what I want to think. That's alleged, but all the other things they did, it's not so. Why is that far-fetched? The show helped him. He's grooming kids, but it was the guest stars. He kissed her, and so how he got caught was the 9-year-old is at his house, and he kissed her, and she backed away, and he said he would get he kissed her, and this is the one that he, like a 9-year-old, and he'd say, "I get you on shows," and he was leveraging his power, which he had none of, to get them. That's what predators do. That's what groomers do. That's what Dan did. That's what this other guy coming up did. They all do this. There's like an MO, and they all do it. And as soon as you see some type of MO happening, get your kids out of there. And he only got 6 years, right? If more testified, he would have gone away for a lot longer, but those parents have failed. I'm sorry, those parents failed. They failed. This guy should be in jail for the rest of his life, and he only got 6 years. 6 years. He had Ziploc baggies and journals saying he doesn't know how long he can hold off R-ing children. 6 years. No apology to the kids. When it happened, everything was just swept under the rug, like it always is. The show must go on. He gets arrested April 4th. So he gets arrested in April, and 4 months later, another one is arrested. And that's when it gets crazy, okay? Then they bring in this guy named Brian Peck, and he's the pickle boy on the show. And he basically, his role is to walk around this big giant plate of pickles and hand it pickles like it's like an ongoing joke. At one point, he hands it to, what's his name? I forget his name. One of the big actors through a glory hole. Like it's glory hole. Basically a glory hole. I'm not kidding, right? This all comes from Dan. And that's Dan pushing the boundaries of what he can get away with. That's all Dan, rewriting these characters into the shows. And Brian Peck is a very good close friend of Dan, right? And this is a kid's show. And the pickle, and they're all eating pickles, licking pickles, and saying, and it's like gross, okay? It's disgusting. And you look back on it now, you knew it was bad. And even parents watching the show, if they were the kids, probably were like, what? Everyone loved and trusted this guy named Brian Peck. And he would always get back rubs too. Like did the same damn thing Dan was like, back rubs and things, getting really close to kids, touching kids and everything else. And Brian was also developmentally arrested as a child, with toys, kids, movie shrines in his house. They all went to his house for I think it was like a barbecue. And he's like, come into my room. And Drake went in, I think it was Drake. Pretty sure it was Drake, who went into this guy's room and saw a picture of John Wayne Gacy, a signed picture of John Wayne Gacy. And, if you don't know who John Wayne Gacy is, he's a serial killer, right? And he was apparently a pen pal and was like openly, hey, I'm a pen pal of John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer. And everybody's like, what? And they all came in to see, and he was flashing, he was flexing it. He shows it off. He's proud of it. And this guy was a supervisor of children. This guy who was a pen pal with a serial killer and had a shrine of a serial killer on his wall and openly was happy about it, was put in charge of kids. So after this party, they had a table read and asked the parents to leave. Right? When you're reading your lines and everything else, and the parents can step out, and lawyerly people, this is what they called them, stepped in and asked them a bunch of questions. But Peck is then arrested on 11 charges of SA, and he would create CSAM with a child actor. And it wasn't known who this was. They asked these kids at this read, do you have anything to say? Has this happened to anybody here? Blah, blah, blah. Do you know who it is? All this kind of stuff. And it was all apparently really awkward and silence. And then no one said anything. And the guys just said, okay, thanks. See you later. And then Dan came in and he's like, all right, let's get back to work, everybody. So this guy was arrested. The lawyers came in to say, hey, does anybody else have anything to say? Which is completely, I can't believe they did that, by the way, without parents being there. That's holy crap. Like, you imagine the higher ups saying, okay, we need to get the parents out. We need to ask these kids inappropriate questions about this predator without their parents there? What? Because they didn't want to give the parents what do you mean there's a predator? Because they didn't want to scare the parents. That's crazy to me. That's done. Nickelodeon should be done because of that. And then the episode sits with they ask the people who we didn't know who it was, and nobody knew who it was, and all of a sudden Drake Bell's sitting there, and it's like, boom, the episode ends, and you're like, oh my gosh, shivers. Okay. Episode 3 starts like this: Drake and Josh talking about the show, how it's up and coming, and it's the new big one. He's sitting in the chair, and I gotta say this: Drake Bell, has the most amazing hair. It's because I have hair envy, obviously, but he's like, his hair is amazing. Just a little bit of we need to come a little break, but his hair is amazing. And I found out when I was telling his story, and all these stories, it all starts out cool, right? He was an extra on the set of, which show was it? With Amanda Bynes' show, and then he got a spin-off because they saw this episode where him and Josh were wrestling or something like that, and it was like, oh, look at these are your guys. And all the while, it was frickin' Brian in the background telling Dan that that's the spin-off they need. Brian was like, from the beginning, like, so, how do you say this, so calculated in how he got Drake to be where he was. From the beginning, he wanted this kid, and it was a long game that he played. Okay, and that's what we see here. They drew it out for you. He was the one in Dan's ear about hiring Drake for his own show, and then, of course, he's going to be the guy in the set that he does like speech. I don't know what he does. I forget the name of the thing he does, but he basically tells people how to tell their lines and stuff like that. It's a pretty big deal in the industry too. He's worked with lots of A-list Hollywood actors too. Like, pretty big deal in the industry. They connected through the history of Hollywood because Drake's really, really, you know, one thing I did notice about all these child actors, especially the stars, is they're so far advanced in their age and maturity. Which doesn't give anybody excuses to treat them like adults, because they're not, but they are all very much, a kid who can act on that level, there's something different about their brain. Okay, there's something different. I think we can all agree, right? They seem much more older than they are, a lot of times because they're in Hollywood and they are groomed that way, but it is, you know, a lot of people can get confused. Well, they act like this one way, so maybe they are that way. That's not true. And you're going to see how that comes up later. But they connected to Hollywood, and he told Drake's dad to drop him off at his house so he could work on him with lines and everything else. And Drake's dad wasn't having it. Drake's dad had stranger danger from day one about Brian. That didn't like him. He always had his eye on him when he was around Brian. And he always would say things, but like push it away. And he'd be like, no, there's nothing wrong. Like, he went to his house for a birthday party, and there was like very, very inappropriate sexual jokes and birthday cards. And his dad just kind of like, his dad was trying to protect the career. At the same time, he understood the game, which sucks. Because if his dad just said no more of this, nothing would happen to Drake. It really, really sucks. The reality of it is really, really sucky. But dad noticed that Brian was hanging out with Drake too much, saw Brian touch Drake, and his dad would notice it. Brian worked with Leonardo DiCaprio, and he would flex on that type of stuff. So the dad goes to producers and the higher ups and say, look, I'm not comfortable with this type of thing, with going on, he's touching my kid, and I don't like it. I get a vibe. He's told, hey, you just might be homophobic because he's gay. So just be careful. But Drake's a guy, right? So that's the thing. There was a tweet about this that I got to read it to you. Here it is. This tweet's really important. Read this tweet. When Drake Bell's dad was concerned about Brian Peck's unusual relationship with his son, he was labeled homophobic. Brian Peck was later arrested for raping Drake Bell when he was only 15 years old. It's not homophobic to protect children from pedos. That's what I'd say. So he was just like, hey, you're just homophobic, so just leave it. And then again, and that's the day and age where if you were labeled that type of stuff, you're canceled. And so you just leave it. That was so much power that they held to say something. Nowadays, you can call anybody, like, you can call me whatever you want. I don't give a crap. It's lost all its power now, but it didn't then. And so he was, maybe you're just homophobic. So Brian tries to step in as Drake's manager. I have the whole story. I'm telling you the whole Drake story right now. Brian tries to step in as Drake manager. Brian started going to all the shows, all of Drake's like rock and roll shows, and showing a ton of interest. Then on Drake's birthday, Brian's house, even though his dad didn't want it, Drake kind of ran the show. These kids run their shows, okay? These kids have a lot of power. Their parents have no power. They really, really don't. Kids who are making the money for the family, they have the power. We've seen that. Jeanette McCurdy's book outlines that very well. These kids have the power. They do whatever they want. Parents are just trying to manage, make the money, and just let the kids do whatever they want. That's so crazy. But that's where the adult-themed birthday cards popped up, and the dad didn't like these moments, but he just kept leaving it at that. He's like, okay, I addressed it, but if you don't think there's anything wrong with Drake, I trust you. He loved his son. So Brian then starts to drive a wedge between the two, right? And this is the grooming that's going on. So I know we overuse the term grooming too, but this is like textbook grooming, right? Driving the wedge between the parent and the child. Brian uses the bad relationship between the dad and his mom, Drake's mom, to separate him from his dad. So he's like, your dad's taking too much money from you. He's treating you this way. He's not letting you have fun. We want to do all these cool stuff. And so what he did was he got a hold of the mom, Brian did, and the mom just basically, like, when he came over to his mom's house one day, he's like, I don't want to go back to dad's. And the mom called the dad and said, he's not going back to you anymore. Sign all his accounts over to me. We're done with this. So the dad is fired as the manager. But the dad just does it. He's like, look, I love my son. Gave the accounts over. Did what I could. I love my son. He's like, he started bawling his eyes out. And he's like, I failed my son. And he did. He did fail his son. But he He was stuck between a rock and a hard place. He tried his best. He saw the stranger danger. He said what he had to say, and you could just tell his dad loves his kid, and he's like, okay, well, what's best for my kid? If this is what's best for him, then so be it. And he gave it to the mom. This is another thing that pissed my wife off and me. But the mom helped him. But here's the thing that the dad said. Drake's dad said this. He's like, look, I'll do all these things for you, but do me a favor. Don't ever, ever, ever let Drake around Brian alone, ever. He said that in the documentary. He said that to the mom, and the mom's like, whatever. Okay? That's what he said. And the dad turned it over. But Brian used that opportunity to hang out with Drake at Disney. Let's go to Disney. Like in between like shooting and all these kind of stuff. They had big spaces of time. And the mom just kind of like, yep. Oh, is that the guy you're not supposed to hang out with? Go ahead to Disney. Right? Brian becomes the role of the manager of Drake. And then Brian drives him everywhere, becomes his manager, then ends up staying the night at Brian's because it was just easier. Right? This is how it all starts. It all starts small. It's not like he did it right away. He built this relationship first from day one, trying to get him on his own show. And then drew the wedge, found the mom as an ally to be the predator. And this happens a lot, by the way. And then became the de facto manager and is like, oh, look, it's too far away to drive you home. Let's just stay here and I'll drive you in the morning. And that was just all innocent at the beginning. It always is like that. One morning, everything changed. And this is where it got really, really gross of the documentary filmmakers. I'm not going to lie. Okay? He wakes up to Brian assaulting him, and Drake didn't know how to get out of the situation. He was 15 years old. Okay? And this is where all the shame and guilt comes in. They think like, okay, did I enjoy it? Did I do this? And it's like there's so much guilt and shame associated with being essayed as a child. It's really, really hard to overcome it. Okay? But that's what happened. And then it just got worse and just kept spiraling. But the documentary filmmakers, what they should have done was like as soon as he started having a struggle session with trying to talk about it, they should have cut it. But they let that just simmer and sit. I sort of understand why. At the same time, it makes you very, very uncomfortable. That's a big, massive trigger warning. This when you get into episode 3 or 4, 2 or whatever one, be really careful with that episode, okay? It's really hard to hear. Very, very hard. And he's like, basically, I don't want to talk about it, but think of the worst thing a predator could do to a child. That was my reality. That's what he said. And he's like, I don't want to talk about it. He was ashamed. He kept it secret. And this is how predators get away with it, right? They shame them into keeping secret. Oh, you'll lose your job or your parents or your this and that. It's kids, man. So Brian convinced everyone to have him there. He was always there, and he just took advantage of it, and it just became this massive, abusive time in this guy's life. They tell him to keep going, too, while he's having this problem. Brian is trying to track him down, even at his girlfriend. So Brian is like, okay, so Drake is like, okay, I'm done with this. He's trying to separate himself from Brian, but Brian calls him everywhere. He's at his girlfriend's house one night, and the phone is ringing off the hook at the girlfriend's house. So how did he get the girlfriend's phone number? We don't know, but he called them a million times. Okay? He wouldn't leave him alone, and then all of a sudden his girlfriend's mom stepped in, gave him the phone, just take a call, and then they were listening. He's like, where are you? We had plans and all this kind of stuff, and he's like, Drake's just laughing it off, and the mom took him into the kitchen privately and said, can you tell me what's going on? He's like, he's just being whatever. He's like, no, that's a 44-year-old man trying to hang out with a 15-year-old boy. Could you tell me what's going on? Because the mom obviously knew, so the girlfriend's mom. So the only person really protected Drake in this situation was his dad, who tried, and then this girlfriend's mom who tried, and she took him to therapy the next day, so maybe he talked to a therapist, but he didn't. He just brushed it off like, oh, it's all good, but thank God we got it ahead of time. That's what he told the therapist, which is crazy, because at this point, he'd already been abused for so long. It's crazy, okay? But the girlfriend's mom saw it. But I think that probably helped him enable his, trying to get away and realizing it's not right and saying, okay, yeah, I can't even imagine the guilt and shame he was going through. He was in a guilt spiral, too. So eventually he told his mom everything one night on the phone, and his mom finally called the police. He had to be detailed and tell the police everything. He talked about how it was so hard to do that. And he had to make a phone call to Brian in a minute. They brought all the equipment in, and Brian just completely admitted it all on the phone. Because he probably felt shame for it or whatever, and just did it. So Brian is arrested. But Drake didn't want anybody to know, because why? Because he wanted to save his career, because it would ruin his career, even though he's a victim here. That's the thing about Hollywood kids who are victims. When they whistleblow, their careers are over. That's all you need to know about Hollywood. So imagine this for a second. You are hurt and abused, and you have to choose between calling out this person or losing your career. Harvey Weinstein's a perfect example of this. How many people did he get to abuse because people like Oprah enabled him? Because people didn't speak up because of the non-disclosure agreements? If you haven't heard the documentary called The Catch and Kill podcast with Ronan Farrow, go listen to it. It's all about the Harvey Weinstein thing. He basically blew it wide open. That's Mia Farrow's son, by the way. Very, 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 very good podcast, by the way. And so it talks about how most people were just legally bound, but to not talk about it. And that's what Hollywood does. So you have to make the choice when you are hurt and you are a victim to come out and call them out or lose everything. That's Hollywood's freaking, that's Hollywood's offer to you. Shut your mouth and stay employed and make money, or tell the truth and see you later. That's why you should never have your kids in Hollywood, because that's the only two choices you're ever going to have. There's nobody out there who came out and whistle blew and said things and now they're still completely famous and popular. No one. Nobody. Okay? None of them. That's all you need to know. Hollywood should be burned to the ground. So Brian's arrested after the call. Drake didn't want anybody to know because he wanted to save his career because that's the only choice he had. And then Dan calls. Drake tells him what happens. Dan's like, don't tell me anything else. Good to know. Basically, like, I don't want to know anything else. And Drake doesn't tell his dad. But he calls his dad and says, hey, did you see that Brian was arrested? His dad's like, oh, thank God. I knew he was a predator. Thank God he didn't get to you. And Drake lied to his dad and said, yeah, thank God he didn't get to me. That's how deep this went. That's how deep the guilt went. And so then finally the dad comes on when he has finally told about the whole thing. He just breaks down because he realizes it's like, he did try. But I don't think any parent in that position is going to be like, I didn't try hard enough. They're going to say I didn't try hard enough. But it drove Drake down a dark path of substance abuse and took him down a big death spiral of like craziness. So that's how episode 4 ends. This is really, really heartbreaking at this point, right? Drake is the biggest victim of all this. Dan Schneider and Nickelodeon are the ones who made this all possible. And again, there were probably 10, 15, 20 more stories like this that are buried beneath NDAs. So Drake's the only one that came out. I'm surprised that he didn't sign an NDA. I don't know how this all went down, but like, you know. So episode 4 rolls around and this is the day of sentencing. The courtroom is full. Okay, so episode 4 rolls around and this is where I get really upset. I'm already pissed, obviously, but this is the craziest thing that you have ever heard when it comes to this. So Drake rolls into court. Courtroom is full. He's like, paparazzi don't know anything because he's obviously being kept secret. It's being sealed. He rolls into court and the courtroom is full on Brian's side. On Drake's side, it's his mother and his brother. His dad doesn't even know yet. Okay, that's it. And who is on Brian's side? It's a lot of famous people, a lot of people you might not know, but these people all were there to stand up for Brian, who was a chomo, Pluto, who literally destroyed this child. Standing up for this guy. He's in court being sentenced for being a pedo, and they know that. It's not like they're like, what are we here for? And I think it was 41 or 44 of them wrote letters defending Brian. Oh yeah, we're going to call them out. So he told them that he got to tell the people across the room that were standing with Brian, be like, I'm going to have this view of my mind all day long that you stood here and you defended a pedo. And I'll have that. Right. And they had that all locked down. Those letters were locked down and they got released in the documentary. And I'm trying to find them because I don't care if I don't get 10 views on those videos. I want to read every single one of those letters to you and who wrote it. So Brian pleads no contest. He gets, hear this, 16 months in jail. So the other guy kissed a girl and should be in jail for the rest of his life, but got 6 years. Brian, who literally AR'd this child from, I don't know how long, don't say, could be months, could be a year, I don't know, gets 16 months because of all these letters that these famous people and writers in the industry wrote and said, it's not like him. I don't care if it's not like him. I don't care what you think. He did the thing, pleaded no contest to it, and gets 16 months? Burn Hollywood to the ground. So who supported those 41 letters? When we heard the first name, we were like, excuse me? And I immediately tweeted out, fuck James Marsden. Because I thought James Marsden was good. Like, I like his movie. My kids like his movies. Like, he seems like a nice guy. James Marsden. Taram Killam, Alan Thicke, Thomas DeSanto, Ryder Strong. A lot of people that are like you wouldn't know, but there's a lot of big actors who stood with this guy, knowing he pleaded no contest to being a pedo, and wrote letters in his defense and his support. A lot of articles about this. Probably should be its own video. So here's from Distractify. Who wrote Brian Peck's support? James Marsden said that he couldn't breathe when he found that Peck had been arrested, and added that Peck was the person who encouraged him to move to LA and pursue his acting. I've known Brian for 14 years and never once did I see any sign of being capable of something like this. So, who cares? He was and is and did. And you still wrote the letter. I have lived at his house for months and shared hotel rooms with him, and never once did he ever make me feel compromised and uncomfortable in any way. I don't care. Doesn't matter, dude. Just because he didn't do it before doesn't negate that he did it. Taron Killam. Although he's now best known for working SNL, Killam worked on several Nickelodeon shows, including All That and The Amanda Show before he appeared in SNL. Killam said he was shocked by Peck's arrest. I've seen the effects the situation has had on Brian. What? And I know for a fact he regrets any mistakes he made and that he's certainly not something that would happen again. Put Brian Peck under the ground. That's where he belongs. And these people who stood up for Brian Peck, they also belong there with him. They don't deserve to breathe the same air as regular people. Okay? Protect kids at all costs. These people are not doing that. This is why Hollywood needs to be burned to the ground, because if there's 41 here, there's thousands and not millions elsewhere who will ignore all these things, who don't care. And you know how we know that? It's because Disney hired Brian Peck after he got out of jail to work on another kids show. And he's still in the industry today, working on many projects with kids. Still, Alan Thicke, father to Robin Thicke and former Growing Pains star, said he was highly professional and nurturing mentor. Who cares what he was? You have to take into consideration what he did now. And now you have to change your mind about someone. Okay, you raped the kid? I'm not friends with him anymore. Joanna Kearns wrote, the co-star from Growing Pains, I've never known Brian to engage in this type of legal activity which he is charged in, and can only believe that there must have been some extreme situation or temptation exerted upon him. That woman just blamed the 15-year-old for tempting Brian Peck. A 15-year-old. I don't care. Even if that's true, which is not. Even if it was, you're the adult. You do not let yourself get tempted by a child. Okay? I don't care if it's true, and it's not. Again, let me reiterate it. Even if it was true, it doesn't matter. You're still the adult. Ron Melendez, the former General Hospital star, spent some time in his letter blaming Bell for the relationship. I've met his family, seen his behavior, and understood that there were problems. I saw him pursue a friendship with Brian, maintain their close ties, saw his parents cede more and more of their parental duties to Brian. That's Brian grooming Drake. He's a child. How do these people should be canceled from Hollywood forever for saying this stuff? You know what? They won't be, though. Brian still got his job back. 16 months for what he did? And we're talking the worst. They brought up little words in the documentary about what he did, and it's the worst you could do. There's nothing else you could do. It's everything you can think of and worse. Will Friedle, the former Boy Meets World star, wrote in defense of Peck, I can only stress and honestly state that Brian must have felt an overwhelming sense of pressure and temporary loss of reason. I don't care. There's no excuse for it. Ryder Strong from Boy Meets World wrote, Peck was one of the most dependable people. These people, all F off. You can kiss everybody's ass. Go fuck yourself. Okay, I know that's bleeped, but go fuck yourself. So that of the documentary was the most distorted part of all of this. And it really was the revelation of what Hollywood really is. Okay, this guy is pleading guilty for all intents and purposes, no contest. He's like, look, I'm not arguing with it. It's I can't believe there's such a thing as no contest, by the way, but whatever. Basically, it's guilt, but not legally, okay? And these people are saying, well, why aren't you contesting this? Aren't you innocent? No, you don't ask that question? But basically, it's guilty. They know it. And they still stand up for this guy. Well, a momentary lapse of judgment. If your momentary lapse of judgment ends up in you R-ing a child, sorry. There's no returning. There's no redemption for you. You should have a millstone strapped around your neck, and you should be thrown to the depths of the ocean. It's literally what the Bible says. That's what I think I think we'd all agree, regardless of whether you're Christian or not, okay? Even the Bible says it should happen. Okay? A millstone around your neck and you should be killed. That's exactly what should happen. Let's bring it back. Okay, let's bring that back. I'm happy. I'd sign that. I'd vote for that. If Biden said tomorrow, hey, I'm going to bring this millstone law, I would vote for Biden. Okay? No problem. Absolutely. Let's bring millstones back. So Brian Peck is rehired by Disney, which pissed me off, which is crazy. Then Disney found out and then fired him, which is like, okay, how do you find out you're like the biggest corporation in the world? You don't know Brian Peck's a predator. Okay, whatever. Nobody's held accountable. Drake doesn't blame Dan, though. That's one thing that they see in this documentary. It's pretty clear. He doesn't blame Dan. He doesn't think it's Dan's fault. The system, but here's the thing. The system isn't protecting kids from people like Brian, from Dan, and all the people that are, it's not. The system does not protect children, or it wouldn't happen. And it happens a lot. Okay? Happens way more than we'll ever know because of legal NDAs and payouts and everything else. It took years and years and years of people who were afraid to get sued by Harvey Weinstein because he had legal NDAs against them. They probably did still get sued because of it. They had to go above their NDAs and just whistleblow. There should never, ever be such a thing as an NDA that has to do with anything like this, like if you are accused, if you hurt me in that way, in a sexual way, okay, and then you say, look, I'll pay you out, and there's an NDA, you can't talk about it ever. That shouldn't be a legally binding thing when you are the victim of something. Take the money, sure, but you should be able to whistleblow too. And they did, and that's how Harvey Weinstein ended up in jail for the rest of his life, where this guy should be too, by the way. Dan becomes even more powerful after this, by the way. More and more powerful. So he's got videos, Dan started tickling and scaring the girls like Jeanette McCurdy and touching them. It's a power move, right? Getting massages. He keeps sexualizing the content more and more. Jokes about being slapped with a sausage. They're shaking the shake weights. The feet videos. Peeing in mouth videos. Baby batter shot videos. Dan had a type 2. Dan, and he would use, and this is one of the lines that really struck me in the video. Dan used nubile sexuality to draw in views and used it for his own purposes, probably. So there's one episode they talk about this costumer, this designer on set said this is one of the things that stuck out to her the most. There's this episode of some kid, like good poops or something like that, and it's words like bite the tip. It's not coming out and it squirts in her face. So Dan is the first. So basically there's this episode where she's trying to bite like a gooey thing off and she can't get it done, and they're talking about how like who was standing there, who took the thing. Was it Amanda Bynes? I forget who it was, but someone took it to their face. No, it was Jamie Lynn Spears' show, and she bit it off, and then a guy came over with a syringe and sprayed it under her face. I'm not going to show it to you because it is what you think it is, okay? And apparently all the dudes and the boys and teenagers in the back of the set were just like, looks like a shot of that stuff, right? And all the girls herself said, I didn't know what that meant. And then as an adult, as she got older, she realized what it was. And the girls didn't know, the boys all knew. And Dan knew, and they were all laughing. Apparently, as soon as it happened, Dan was the first person to laugh out loud about it. How many adults did that have to go through, even in post-editing process, to see that and like, yeah, let's put this on TV. It's disgusting. They show the Ariana Grande scenes again. Dan was always being massaged. Everyone knew that there was nowhere to go. They had nothing to say. The celebration of Dan, when they did that big Nickelodeon thing, were like, we all love Dan. Guess who wasn't there? Jeanette McCurdy. Then they talked about Jeanette McCurdy and her whistleblowing of all this. How Dan always humiliated people in public he didn't like, and he had favorites. And then all of a sudden, there was another investigation. Right? It's probably the third one, fourth one, I don't know. And then now he's no longer allowed on set at all. But my question to them was like, why not just fire him at this point? Get rid of him. How many times are you going to have this problem where he's not allowed on set anymore because there are people complaining? Like, you know that there's going to be lawsuits. Probably was, many. Again, there's probably so many settlements we have no idea about, we'll never know about. That's what I'm saying here. He's removed off the set because they're like, hey, you're costing us too much money. They don't care about the kid. They care about the money that it's costing them. All of a sudden, yeah, the union rep, someone complains to a union rep. The union rep says, look, I've gotten so many more complaints about this too. Let's bring it to them. And then finally he's removed in 2018 from them completely because the union stepped in and said, no more. We're not going to send another union actor and you're not getting any more. Basically, they're threatening to shut off union. They have to use union. They have to. And so they finally said, okay, well, if that's going to cost us everything, we got to get rid of Dan. That's the only time they got rid of the only time they got rid of Dan Schneider was when it was going to cost them too much money. That's it. And then they say, look what happens to these kids once the fame goes away and they're just tossed aside. None of these kids are loved and honored past the point of their fame and what they can bring to the studio. They're just a number. They're a dollar sign. That's it. And when they're done, they're cast aside and they're treated like trash. No one gives a crap about them. And Nickelodeon takes no responsibility for any of it. None. They don't give a shit. The Amanda Bynes story, they touched on a little bit more. It's so sad. She wasn't on the show, but it's so sad. Drake Bell said he almost died, and he's like, the reason why is because we're tossed away without a second glance backwards, and we're like, he's like, if I didn't get the help I needed, I would have died. And has his own things that he went through too. And I asked the question here, like, how do we fix this? Is Hollywood a good place for kids? Ask yourself that question. And if your answer is always going to be resounding, yeah, probably not. Even if it's like, oh, well, maybe not. But we all know it's a resounding no, it's not. Right? There's not like a moment where you're like, hey, Hollywood's safe for kids. We all think that. Nobody thinks that. Okay? Ask anybody who works in Hollywood if they were truly brave enough to answer your question. No, Hollywood is not safe for kids. And there's not even somebody who can say, well, maybe it is. No, it's not. And so when you answer the question, no, Hollywood's not safe for kids, why do we have kids in Hollywood? Why? Because dollars. That's why. Because money. Because power. Because Epstein type of people. Do you know what I'm saying? These kids are used and abused just like Harvey Weinstein used and abused women. The kids in the industry are used. It attracts predators because of the power dynamic. That's why I think you should, honestly, I know I'm saying this sounds really sexist, Stop having men in productions with little girls or men or kids in general. Anyway, no more men in productions with kids. Find someone else talented enough to use AI. I don't care. Okay. How about no more men? And how about this? If you do have anything like this going on, again, this is pervasive. It's not changed. It's going to continue on. If there's any inkling of it, if a parent comes and complains about one thing, that's it. Do your investigation. Figure out if it's true. If it is, get rid of them. Don't keep enabling the behavior. That is crazy to me. This documentary should shut down anything to do with Nickelodeon. You should never be able to watch a Nickelodeon show. Netflix right now should remove anything with Nickelodeon in it. Prime, anything, all these streaming platforms, anything with any of these shows, including Disney, by the way, who is, again, hired this guy after, all take it off. Okay? Pay these kids billions of dollars to let them continue on with their lives. Make reparations to these children that you hurt. Take the content off, no more. Get rid of it. Especially if a kid says, look, I don't want it on there anymore, get rid of it. They don't, because the dollar matters more. But again, it's Hollywood is really, obviously it's a $1 billion-trillion industry. But in my opinion, the stuff that comes down to the abuse of children and adults and everything, it all comes down to power. And these people who can have everything that they want. And so they get everything. And the thing that they want now is the thing that they're not supposed to have. The thing that's illegal to have. The thing that's too taboo to have. But they can get all the other stuff. And they just become bored of it. And that's where Epstein steps in. That's where Harvey Weinstein steps in. That's where Dan Schneider steps in. They fill a hole. They fill a gap. And they provide a service. And Hollywood is that service for these people in power who can have everything, who have more money than they know what to do with, could never spend it in their lifetime, who will never have to worry about anything, have had everything carnally, but want the thing that they shouldn't have. That's what happens. And we got to stop. Like, I say we got to stop it. Like, how? Burn it to the ground. Stop watching movies. I don't know. Stop subscribing to Netflix. I don't know. There's never going to be a movement that will ever. It's too powerful. That's really sad, unfortunately, and everybody knows what I'm saying. It's just too powerful to stop. It's a movement too powerful to stop. But these documentaries are huge world shakers for this type of industry, and hopefully they wake up and start getting people who are smart and have empathy in the roles of CEOs of these companies and just don't put up with it anymore. But it's still the old boys club. And until that transitions and turns over, it's going to continue to be this way. So we could talk about how woke Hollywood is and all this kind of stuff, but if woke Hollywood brings in safer places for children and women and men, okay, then okay, do it. If that's the end game. But is it? That's the question. So anyway, that's the documentary. Please, guys, make sure you go watch it. Hell or high water. Beg, borrow, and steal. Watch this documentary series. Is probably the most important thing in this conversation we've ever had. So, yeah. And again, trigger warning, it's going to be really hard to watch. You will be pissed, especially about these people like James Marsden. Fuck James Marsden, okay? Like, no longer will I ever, like, they should be canceled because of this. Keep track of it. Share this video. Share that video. Talk about this more. Needs to be talked about, okay? Everybody take a deep breath. You're going to need it today. I always leave these episodes when we talk about this type of stuff with no hope. And I'm not even joking. I don't feel good about talking about these things. I don't feel like, yeah, we've accomplished something here. Yeah, we've exposed it. The documentaries exposed it. We talk about it. But I don't feel like, okay, yeah. I don't feel like determined to be like, yeah, we're good. I always feel worse after these. Because I don't think anything's going to change. Send the asteroid. Cool. Asteroid. Thank you for being here, everybody, for these conversations, these really tough ones. You're really, really important. And you are really important. Protect your kids. Protect kids around you. And I will see you when I see you.